right.
All right. Allow you to look at the camera. You see what's left of me.
I'm gonna say I can hear your voice right now. I can hear it definitely much clearer.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. I can hear everything, but it shows the camera. The camera should be on.
There we go.
There he is. There he is.
There's the face of the talent.
Did the camera come on? I don't see
It
you
did.
guys.
Yeah, I can see you now.
Well, lucky you.
Can I see us?
I see RW and JD.
Hi, everybody. This is Ryan from Palgren. I'm sitting here with Jeff Dotterman. Everybody knows him from Warriors Way and doing it with the Dotterman series. And we are joined by a very, very special guest here, Steve Schwarzer, and the man, the myth, the legend. I mean, there's not much more I can really say to introduce him, but I don't want you guys to hear it from my words. I want you guys to get to know who Steve really is. And again, Steve, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. I enjoy it.
Perfect. So first and foremost, everybody that obviously is in the knife making world knows who you are. They've had the opportunity to meet you, but just in a slight case that somebody was born under a rock, could you tell us more about who you are and get more familiar with your background, so that way everybody can get to update and get to know who the real Steve is?
Well, sure. Yeah, I came from a metalworking background. I hit my first piece of hot iron in the 7th grade. I made a chisel, and I think I got a C+ on it. If I remember correctly. Anyway, that shop teacher was real kind. I was one of those kids. I'm like a flat kid with a flashlight. I can focus on anything about 30 seconds unless I really like it, and then I'm like a laser beam. But it's at this stage of life, with all the improvements they've made, I would have the alphabet after my name. And a PhD would just be the beginning. Yeah, I've always loved metals, and then right out of high school, I worked for a big aircraft company, and my father had worked there, and I worked there for a little while, and I built a bunch of stuff. I built some domes in the Saturn rockets.
Nice.
And I did a bunch of stuff, and that's where I did my first forging. We did a lot of aluminum forging, used big air hammers in that shop, that part of the plant that I was in. We used big Seco stamp air hammers and sheet metal prefab. And I made a few knives while I was in there, but I call them knife-shaped objects because I had no idea about heat treating or anything. If it was steel and you ground it and it looked like a knife, it was a knife kind of thing. So I call them knife-shaped objects.
I like that.
And so, you know what they say is that every Southern male is a frustrated knife maker, some more frustrated than others. Anyway, so after I quit working at that, I moved to Florida in 70. And in 72, I got a job rigging, doing heavy rigging, moving 500,000-pound loads into a big power plant. And we were moving the generators and the stators and big old box burners and all kinds of stuff in there. And I had to get a temporary thing from the Boilermakers Union. And that was in 1972. And it had Boilermakers, iron chip fitters, and blacksmiths. And there were no blacksmiths left in the local. So I got a book by Alex Beeler, and I keep a copy of it here in the shop just to remind me, and I show it to young kids when they come in here. But it's The Art of Blacksmithing by Alex W. Beeler. And then in the book, there's about a page and a quarter on forging blades. And I read that, and it triggered something in me that never got well. It's like catching rabies. It doesn't get better. Anyway, the next day I went out and found me a big anvil and a coal-fired forge, and I went to beating on steel. Wow. And I was so smart that I would people say, well, you can't tear up an anvil. Yes, you can.
I've seen that.
You sure can. Yeah, when you're heating up crosscut saw blades and cutting them out with a chisel hot on top of your anvil face, it's not a good thing.
Oh, man.
Yeah, anyway, but it's been refinished. I still have that anvil. I kept
nice.
It.
I would
got
too.
Two of them. I got a matched pair. They're Fishers, and they're about 250 pounds apiece. And one of them was Confederate and one of them was Federal. One of them has a Federal
Wow.
Eagle on it, another one doesn't. They're both Civil War era, and they're almost pristine except for the stuff I did to it. Anyway, but I started forging, and I was making uh, uh, big old fillet knives for the offshore guys, and I was using a L6 steel, which was what the saw blades were made out of. I didn't know it at that time, but it's a very forgiving thing, and
Huh.
they were cutting up those big king mackerel stuff with it, and I was charging the outrageous price of $15 to $20 a piece, and then I upped them to 35, and they would whine, but I sold a bunch of them. And then then I was real interested in it, and then I started searching for other knife makers because there weren't any back in that time that I knew about. Let me preface it with that. And so, long story short, I heard about a guy that was working on a job I was working on up in White Springs, Florida, and his name was Bobby Tyson. And Bobby and I are still friends, and I looked him up, and he was one of those pipe fitters. I was a boilermaker at that time. I could have been a pipe fitter, but they found out my parents were married, so they wouldn't take me in the local. As a construction joke. But anyway, he was leaning up against a tank, and I was, young guy then in my 20s, and I had two or three of these old fillet knives. They basically were a long pointy thing, and I was grinding them on a flat wheel on a drill press. That's how I ground the edges on them, and I was using hickory hammer handles and copper wire that I ground wire I'd steal off telephone poles for the rivets.
Nice.
And anyway, I've got one of the things. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
If you can see me, I'm gonna hold this thing up, and then you can see it. I can't see you, but this is one of them,
Oh, wow.
and that's what they look like.
That's
Of
incredible.
course, this one was the fancy one because I used a welding rod for rivets on this one.
Ooh.
That's bad as the bone. Anyway, I had three of those old things rolled up in a snotty rag in my hip pocket. And what I had in my head when I walked up to this guy was, man, I'm going to show this guy something about making knives. I was so full of myself because I didn't know. My friends told me I was wonderful, so I assumed that I was.
Yeah.
And I walked up to this guy and said, "You Bobby Tyson?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I hear you make knives." And he pulled out the most beautiful pocket knives made out of some mystery steel called D2. I'd never heard of it. And it walked and talked, and it was just perfect. It was hollow ground and shiny. Just perfect knife. And, and he looked at me and said, "You make knives?" I said, "Well, I'm sort of." And I tried to back away from him so he wouldn't see that mess that was in my pocket.
Yeah.
And he begged me, and I pulled three of those things out, like, I just showed you. And he looked at them, and all I can tell you, he was very kind. And he says, "Well, I have books on making knives." I said, "They're what? You have what?" "Yeah, there's books on how to do this." I said, "You're kidding me." He said, "No, I have them." I said, "Where do you live?" He said, "Jacksonville." I said, "No. Where do you live? Street address. Where do you live?"
Yeah.
And he made a mistake of telling me. I moved in with that guy.
That's
I
awesome.
literally was up there about every
wow.
weekend, and that first weekend I was there with him. He probably progressed me 5 years in the business. He was just the nicest guy. And it's so funny. We come full circle. He could make two of those really nice pocket knives in a day. It still takes me about half a week to make one. And
He can make
anyway,
two of them in a day?
in a day, and they worked perfect, and they were beautiful, and stag handles, the whole 9 yards. And now all he does is forge these great big old Skagel looking choppers. That's all he makes. He was making
Really?
He went from being at the top of the heap to going back to the bottom and making. They're beautiful knives. There's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
But he's up in Georgia now. But I always count him as my first teacher because he was so good to me, and I never will forget the help he gave me. And that's one of the reasons I teach. I try to help other people. But
I love that.
anyway,
I love hearing that.
Yeah, and about let's see, I joined ABS in '81, and I got my Master Smiths in '83.
Okay.
I
Oh,
would have
wow.
had an 81, but me and Moran got into a big argument, almost a fist fight in a New York knife show over it. And I was young and stupid and showed my butt. You know, everybody says, you know, that guy made an ass out of you. No, he didn't. I did
Yeah.
it. And I was good at it. It took about 8 years to fix that relationship,
Yeah.
but I got it fixed. But
Oh,
anyway,
man.
but as far as I know, I'm the longest continuously serving ABS Mastersmith.
Mhm.
And they felt like they needed to put me in the Hall of Fame at the Blade Show Hall of Fame last year.
Mhm.
And there's like 23 people or something in that alive, and there's only been 70 something in there since they found it. It was quite an honor. I told them, I said, I really appreciate you doing it, especially while I'm alive.
Absolutely.
But
Man,
no,
you're too humble. You are like, there's a reason they call you the wizard, man. You've done some amazing things throughout, time. Just looking at some of your pieces that you had at the table, some of the stuff that you've been doing on Instagram as you're clearing stuff out, those mosaics that you're doing, like that's insane. Like how you did them before it was even a thing. Like that's incredible.
Yeah.
it was one of those things that I credit Daryl Meyer with inspiring me a lot. And of course, I worked with Pendray. And that goes back in the mid 70s, about 76. I started reading about Damascus. Of course, Moran brought that back to light. It never stopped being made. That's what a lot of people think, it was lost. The only thing that was lost was the Christian Damascus, the Woots.
Okay.
And I was on that research team with Al Pendray and me and a guy named Bob Jobe before Dr. Verhoeven got involved with it. And so when we did the first stuff, and so we were involved, that was the Damascus that was lost. The pattern wheel stuff was never lost. It was continuously been produced probably for at a minimum of 2,000 years and probably a lot longer. There's a huge history in it, and the thing is, for me, it's an addiction. It's a discovery process, and what I found out is there's not time to study every bit of it. You just physically run out of time. You got to make a knife every once in a while just to pay the bills and keep the bills coming.
Yeah.
Buy these expensive, fancy buffing machines. Man, that thing is a dream. I love it.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. How's that treating you? And what project have you been working on with it?
Well, Mr. Dodderman threw me under the damn bus. I got to buy a bunch of more wheels for it now.
I saw that.
Well, hey, I got you a code. Just use my last name.
I know, and 10% off.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's a plus. And I just need the part number so I know what to order.
Joking aside, I'll send them to you for real.
Yeah, that'll work. Yeah,
I'll send you the part numbers, and I'll put you in an email with the president of Dedeco for sure.
Oh, that'd be great. I bought a whole bunch of his stuff. I was out with in Texas with Spencer Applin.
Okay.
And he carves and he uses a lot of their abrasives. That guy's one of those he's one of those back in the woods guys that nobody knows about, but he's a carving genius. He's just he's an amazing guy. He taught a bunch of those guys out there how to do it, and that's one of the things. I went down to his house, and he lived out in a salt marsh in South Texas, and I went out to his house a couple of years ago, and just to see. I didn't want his. I want to see his finishing technique. His style of carving is very different. Mine. I do a lot of carving. I enjoy carving, but I wanted to see how he was finishing that material so fast. And the guy, where you really learn from somebody is when you get with somebody that's isolated, and they don't have anybody telling them you can't do it that way. They figure out different ways to do stuff, and what you get is really interesting stuff.
Gosh, it's really interesting to hear you say that in light of social media and everything that like my generation and the generations that are coming up now are exposed to. There's so much technique and things that are available just
Right.
by typing into YouTube whatever you want to learn. You can learn it if you pay attention and you dive in deep enough. But like when you were growing up, like you didn't have that. Like you had to work 3 times as hard as we do, 10 times as hard, and there weren't nearly as many people naysayers as there are today. Just because they've learned a way, they tell someone else, you can't do that. That's impossible to do it that way. This is the way you do it, and this is the only way you can do it. Like that drives me bonkers.
Oh, and it's true. And what they don't understand is like there was like 6 people on the planet, and I always preface it that I knew about, because there's always some guy in a cave doing cool stuff you don't know about. And you figured I'll tell you a sidebar story about that sometime. But I always preface it with that because they exist.
Yeah.
And there was a technique that I worked out in the early 80s, and I was slabbing, getting mosaic, the picture to the surface of the blade was a trick. And what Daryl Meyer did is he did what the Merovingians did, and they twisted it and they cut into it. So what you have is like a pile of springs coiled one side and the other, and each one of those has an image in it. As you bisect those coils and reduce to the core, where you get down to those stars and stuff where it's not turning, you get a positive and a negative image of what you put in there. And it has to be a certain percentage in. And anyway, you can get real technical with it. But that's one way to expose the image. Oh. And the other way is to do an accordion cut and then flatten it out, which in the early days, it had about a 75% success rate until we figured out how you had to move it. And then it came where we're cutting these little plaquettes off with a 45-degree angle and welding those. And I was doing that on both sides of a blade. And back in the 80s, I've got pieces of it here. And I can show you some of the blades that were made that way, because I use a lot of nickel, and that stuff, you don't want that anywhere near a cutting edge. Unless it's very high density with high carbon steel. You don't want it there because it'll fold up like an old cat wanting his belly rubbed. And you don't want that. And then carbon won't pass through it, so it won't harden. And so, I always put center cores in, and I used that technique for years. And there was another man that came along, and he was in the 90s, and he started using that technique, but he was just using the one side and putting a backing plate on and welding them. And I was young and stupid and full of myself, and I got offended by that because I didn't get any credit for it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so it went along quite a few years with that little cuckleburr under my saddle, and I thought about it, and I was fixing to publish an article on those techniques. And I talked to a guy I know. He's real smart, really historical young guy, and he really done a lot of research. He said, I got something I want to send you before you publish. And what he sent me was a pamphlet of a Javanese bladesmith. And that guy had died in the very early 90s before this other fellow had even done a piece, done a blade even. He came into business. And what was in that pamphlet was exactly, not something like it, but exactly the technique I was using. Oh, wow. Now, I had to rethink everything because I've never been to Indonesia.
Right. That's the exact same thing. Like just because you don't see it or know about it doesn't mean it's not there or it's not capable or if the possibility isn't there. It just means your brain hasn't unlocked the ability to do it yet. Man, that's crazy.
Yeah. And what the epiphany on this thing was, it's a solution to a problem with a known material. We're all using the same material worldwide. It's iron and carbon and trace alloys. That's it. Yeah. And so once you understand how that material moves and how to make it join and how to keep the air off of it, you can weld almost anything to anything and get a result. And so I had to rethink everything because it was a solution to a problem. That's not captured. That's not endemic to me or anybody else. That's why I always say, that's why I always represent, unless there's some guy in a cave, this is the first guy that ever did that.
Oh, man.
Yeah, see, you don't know whether that guy's granddaddy taught him or his dad taught him, because they were mystic Muslim bladesmiths, and the tradition didn't go outside the family.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, and a lot of the woot stuff, the techniques were lost because it died in one generation. Because it wasn't
they
written
didn't
down,
share it.
studied. Yeah, it wasn't written down. And the people that documented it didn't know the techniques. It's like the Brits documented all the woots. And one of the first things that Alfred and I found out, and it's 99% Al Pendray. I'm not taking credit for anything he did. I was just kind of following along as a cheerleader and cleaning the shop once in a while kind of thing. But he we were reading about the Brits, and they were putting green leaves in the crucible, and it didn't make any sense at all to either one of us, but we tried it.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened to be chinaberry leaves, because that's what was growing outside Alfred's shop. And what we found out later is that those leaves, in the absence of oxygen, give off a gas, a carbon monoxide gas, which helps the iron nuclei quicker. It helps it come in and get into solution. Yeah, it really helps, and it also boosts the carbon. And the higher the carbon content, the lower the melting temperature.
That's incredible. I just mind blown right now.
Well, most of those blades were 1 to 1.5%. There's a lot of guys now, they're taking these little induction heaters, and I have one, and they're throwing a bunch of stuff in pot and melting it and going, that's loose. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It is not. It shows a dendritic pattern. You can go down to your local steel supplier and pull you a brand new precision ground piece of D2 off the rack and put it in ferric chloride. It'll show you a beautiful pattern. Right. It's all dendritic. It's not Woots. Woots is the whole solution of Woots is very, very slow cooling with a specific carbon content and a specific trace mineral content, but very trace, that causes it to form. And then the rest of it's forging technique. You have to thermocycle it and forge it, and it takes cycle after cycle after cycle to make it happen. Anyway, other than that, it was easy.
I know. It's funny. I think talking to you with the extensive knowledge and background that you have, would you agree that a lot of the common arguments and frustrations in the bladesmithing community today, it's more of a failed terminology and wrong references and people using the wrong name for something that causes more of the issue than...
Oh yeah, you see it all the time. They don't know, but they saw it on YouTube, so it's a fact. Yeah. It's like forging fire is real. Of course, that was a joke. I was just joking. Please don't sue me, but that's
Oh gosh, that's funny. No, that's man, some of that I didn't know that about your history. I mean, that's so cool to hear. I guess to hear in person a little more about your background. I just know a lot of the carvings and the Damascus and the different stuff that you do more recently. But man, that's great. Like you've been through it, like literally.
But one of the high points was I taught in Germany in '93 at the National Forge Museum in Germany, and I presented papers on for Dr. John Verhoeven, and then Howard Clark and him had done the study on carbon diffusion in pattern welded material, and John was tied up with the Woots project with Pendray over there, so he asked me to present the papers. I did. And then I also presented papers on my shooting scene that I did, where I put the man and the dog and all the birds and the blade and made a pristine shooting scene.
Wow.
And that was fun. But the fun part of that was you got to meet every museum director in Europe, Asia. The Japanese were there. Sardinians were there. We made blades out of iron sand off the Corsican beach. Wow. At that thing. I still got a pocket knife made out of it. And Yoshinda Yoshihara was there. I helped him forge. And one of the neatest things I saw was a kid named, if I'm not getting it wrong, it's Gopal Gopular. He was about 15 years old. He did some kafgari, and he made a piece of steel out of mild steel, and then he gold overlaid all that stuff while I watched him do it.
Mhm.
I just sent that thing to Jordan Lamont, and I said, I want you to have this. Because I'm getting up in years, and that thing going to the yard sale for a nickel. I wanted him to have it.
Yeah.
That's the worst part about our industry, like the knife making and the custom made stuff that gets made. If you don't know what it is, like it's people just pass it over and it looks cool, and like they don't understand that it could have taken a month to make, or
exactly.
Like it's just mind boggling. Oh, but I mean, you've shared a ton, and like there's so many things that like people have been inspired by what you're doing. Where'd you derive your inspiration from? Like where, like you kind of went so quickly into it, but like you
I
don't
never stopped.
Yeah. Like, but you don't have a normal mindset like of even back then and even today. Like you're constantly learning. Like every day.
Yeah, absolutely. That to me is what drives me. What I'm mad about now is I'm trying to push an 18-year-old brain that's on fire around in a damn 77-year-old body, and it doesn't like it. I want to do 14-hour days. I had Neil Cameron here in the shop 2 or 3 years ago, and he and I have become very, very close. And and after it was like, I think it was here 10 days, at the 10th day, he finally stopped. And he said, I don't think I'm going to be able to get you down. I said, you're right. It took me 2 weeks to heal up. I had to lay in a bed for 2 weeks after he left, but I wasn't going to let him whoop my ass.
No. No, and I think that's what really makes you stand out, like Jeff said, the fact that you have a passion for this and the continuance of wanting to learn and be able to teach. I mean, that goes to show that you really do embody the knife making community. And everybody that I've met throughout the years going to Blade Show, everybody has just whispered your names over at our booth and said, Steve is the man you need to go talk to. And obviously now here we are talking, and it's, an absolute honor. And to be able to hear stories like this just really embodies, again, what everybody has known about you and the culture that you have created, and just this wholesome, community that follows through. And I mean, everybody sits there and has an admiration for you. And obviously many people have spoke up that we have talked to in the past as you are their mentor. You are the guy that they have sat and watched and learned and took notes from. And the reason why they are in this knife, this blade community now is because of what you've been able to, whether it's 10 minutes of them, sitting down and talking, watching a video of yours, or being able to come out to one of your classes.
Right, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm focusing more on teaching now. I'm still making knives, and I have them for sale on a special this week. It's $19.95 and free shipping, kind of thing.
I like it. Plug away.
I'm still making knives, but I'm kind of making what I want to make. I make using knives. I get as much joy out of making a simple skinning knife that really works and is exceptional for the average guy that has to save up his few dollars to get the thing than I do for a guy that walks up my table and says, I'll take those.
Yeah.
And because that's just as important to that fellow as it is the other guy. And then, but at some point in time, you got to try to make a living at it. And I'm hoping to do that in the next few years. It's like I'm sitting in here looking at all this tooling. This is my upstairs. Y'all can see it. That's me when I had hair and a beard. That's a karate trophy. I don't do anything a little bit. That's a car wreck. That's where my face went in the windshield, and that was me. Wow. Anyway, I did martial arts at a pretty high level. I've got 3 Dan grades in different systems. I do Yoshikai and Kempo and Kendo, and
Wow.
old school jujitsu, and I do a bunch of the Philippine stuff. Not It's like my teacher tells you, I wasn't very good, but I was enthusiastic.
I like it.
I was always mediocre, and when I first started training, I couldn't see. I was like Mr. Magoo. You took my glasses off, so I had to learn to counterpunch because I'm basically 2,400. I said, and let me get a hold of you for just a second.
Yeah.
So your head had to be pretty tough. But
Yeah.
anyway, I have beat people's hands completely sore with my face several times. And
Oh, I love it.
but no, it's all that transfers into what I do because if you understand the martial movements and stuff, it really helps with designing knives that function. The same way with designing the proper skinning knife or whatever you're going to do with it. And it's like one of my greatest treasures is the kids I teach. One of them that fairly recent is Seth Lopez. I don't know whether y'all know Seth or not.
I know him. He's amazing.
Let me tell you something. He is a wizard. I spent a little bit of time with him, and he went around me like I was parked. It was just amazing. His design stuff he's got the mind for it.
The flows in his knife and like his keyhole. I've seen like that keyhole handle guard that that's just mind-boggling. And then with the pattern on everything that he's doing it with his steel, like it's sick.
He's good. And I went over to South Africa, it'd been 3 or 4 years ago to work with Henning, and that was a treat too because he came out of the gunsmithing industry, and he's a registered gunsmith, and he was fitting wood and metal together. But the thing is, that guy has got it all. He's got art. He thinks with both sides of his brain, and his head's about the size of a house, so he's got plenty of brains in there, and probably a brow ridge that's 4 inches thick. But anyway, he's another one of those genius level people. And he's a natural, and they don't come around very often.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young guys coming. I mean, they're just phenomenal. I had a kid show up and back in the 90s. His name's Antonio Fogaritsu. Look him up.
Okay.
Yeah, he's Sardinian kid. His family had been making knives for 100 years, and he didn't want to continue making those traditional folding knives. He wanted to do something exceptional. And so he saved up his money, and it was before he got married or anything. And he came over and he spent probably 2 weeks with me in my shop when I was in Pomona. Within 2 years, his patterning had gone around me like I'd parked, and now he's into this really high-tech precision machining, Michael Walker grade stuff with multiple inlays and stuff. And I'm so proud of that because it wasn't what I taught him that made the difference. It was what he did with the knowledge after.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. See,
Absolutely.
it's he, and the same thing with Lopez and also with Henning. The desire and the capability and the drive was there. All they needed was just a little bit of direction, and man, they took off. Hell, I'm sitting at the bus stop waiting on them to come back by, but it's unbelievable, and I'm really proud of that stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, the idea is to get them where they can think. And all those guys were already doing that. It's just, it's throwing wood on the fire and say, man, you can do this, and there's no reason you can't do this.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody tell you no. It's like designing anything. I think that was probably the hardest thing I ever did was I lost an eye. My left eye. I woke up blind in my left eye, and Laura won't tell me how it happened, but I woke up blind in my left eye. And my daughter-in-law is an eye doctor in Jacksonville. And so we got in my Corvette and we went to Jacksonville. It's normally a 2-hour drive. I made it about an hour and 15 minutes. The other traffic is not there if you can't see it.
It's
I
true.
was driving with one eye with no depth perception.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went in and sat down in the chair and I said, "You need to look at my eye. There's something wrong." And she's looking at my eye and she's New York Yankee. And she doesn't get excited about anything. She's going, oh my, that looks like alligator skin. I've never seen that before. And I said, "This is not going to be eye drops, is it?" And she said, "No, you sit right there. I'm calling the surgeon."
Oh,
I
wow.
go over to see McDonald. I think it was McDonald was the young guy's name. He looked like he was about 12 years old. And I said, "How many of these operations you done?" And he said, "Oh, thousands." I said, "You're my guy."
Yep.
Anyway, he said, "It's so bad, I'm going to wait till Thursday to operate on you. Normally, I put you in the operating room right now, and the chances are you won't get your eye back." And I went, "Oh, well, you're not cheering me up."
Yeah.
Anyway, they opened my eye up and physically rolled the wallpaper back up, attached it with a laser, and put a gas bubble in there
Okay.
to push that retina tissue back up, hold it in place. I had to sit in a chair for 9 days with my head hanging down.
Oh, wow.
You talk about Mr. Happy. Oh
Yeah.
my God. I was so pleasant to be around. The ground would smoke for about 100 yards around me.
Yeah.
I was so pissed off. Anyway, it took a year for that to heal. And a friend of mine had a company wanted to start making knives. And anyway, I designed a bunch of knives for a year.
Mhm.
And then he quit paying me. I quit going, and we parted friends. But that was an eye opener. And that's literally it's one of the things in my shop I insist on is eye protection.
Oh, absolutely.
You lose an
And
eye, you can't drill a hole because you can't get the depth perception right.
yeah, no, exactly. One thing with our machines, as I'm sure you're well aware, that everything that we have is OSHA certified. And we know that obviously, some of the guards can kind of get in the way when it comes down to certain tasks, especially on the grinders. But with us, safety is a number one concern of our practicing, and obviously, it's now you can speak, in true testimony as to why it's very important for everybody to take advantage of wearing those safety goggles there too.
There you are. I can see you now. How'd that happen?
Yeah, now I can't see. I lost my devices tonight have just gone bonkers, so I apologize.
No, you're good.
No, this is good. No, I love the machines, and most people don't understand it, but a buffing machine is the most dangerous machine in the shop,
Absolutely.
and that's why I love it. What got me is Neil had me come over to his shop, and I went over to Hawaii and hung out with him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he had one of those little buffers in the shop mounted. And I saw that thing. I said, "Oh, I got to have one of these." Anyway, I finally ran into you guys up at Blade Show. And I thought, man, I want to get that thing. And I did. And I've been moving around. I haven't figured out where it's going to get a permanent home yet because it's so small. I can move it anywhere, and you
absolutely.
don't need a huge amount of torque with those small wheels. And most people, they don't realize that you can do all that fancy handle material where they're doing all that casting with that resin and stuff, and it won't burn because you turn that wheel slow enough.
Correct. And another thing too to add on to that point where, like you said, you're able to move it wherever you want to take it. This thing is completely balanced. So you can move it anywhere in the shop and you don't have to worry about it being, either on a workbench or on a stand, and you don't have to worry about securing it down because it's not going to move on you.
Right.
Right.
Well, Ryan asked me to send him a picture of a piece of material burnt. I turned that thing up to 3,600 RPM, tried to burn it on 120. Like I still can't. I haven't burnt anything yet.
And this is something that we've been trying to prove. Yeah, this is what we wanted to be able to show into a tutorial. We encourage our guys to go out there and use the machine and beat on these machines and let us know feedback. I mean, that's the only reason why we're progressing as a line from what we hear back. We're never complacent in saying, hey, what we put out here is what you get, and we're going to let this ride for the next 12 years. We're always looking for that end user feedback to be able to make those changes. And that was part of the call of action, to say, hey, go ahead and try to burn through a piece, and that way I can start to really talk and hone in onto that information out there. And yeah, obviously with when the variable speed content there, it is going to be truly hard, and this is what we want to really educate. As you said, Steve, this is the most dangerous piece in any workshop, and we looked at it and said, how can we make it safer?
Oh, I loved walking in a shop where somebody got one of those great big 3-horse, 3,600 RPM thing with a wire wheel on it, and they looked like they'd been fighting a porcupine with a steel spine sticking out of them everywhere. And
Yeah.
I'm going, yeah, that's cool. You got your safety squint on. Where are your glasses?
Yep.
Right, and then they've got no glasses on, and those things are
Uh,
flying all over the place.
Exactly.
I was working. I went full time in '82. I had an industrial accident. I breathed some sulfuric acid gas, and it just about took me out. And I was welding in it and didn't realize it. Anyway, long story short, that was the end of my Boilermaker career, and I went to making knives. And but one of the jobs I had to do, I was working, and we were moving a bunch of machinery and cleaning up around the job site and everything. And I went over where the office area was, and there was an iron worker out there running a weed eater, cleaning brush and limbs and everything with no glasses on, with this weed eater running like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a grumpy guy, he'd whip your ass for a nickel. And I thought, man, how am I going to do that? And I walked up to him. And I said, can I talk to you for just a minute? I said, yeah. He shut that thing off. I said, listen, I'm not trying to get in your business or anything. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but have you done everything you want to do in this lifetime with two eyes?
Yep.
And he went, what? I said, have you done everything that you want to do with two eyes? I'm just asking. I said, because that will take one of them. But you do whatever you want to. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I walked away. He went and put some glasses on.
Nice.
Oh, man.
So you got to approach that bear kindly. If you hold out a chicken, they won't bite you. They'll take the chicken.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
So one other question I did have here for you was, we did touch base on, your experiences and as well with everybody that you're bringing into, the classroom setting and teaching. For those that are watching that are thinking about getting into, the knife making community and start, their journey and becoming a bladesmith here, what are some advice, some tips and pieces and some good advice that you can offer them to really help them to keep at it, or key tips as to how to start this?
Well, we're going through a big winnowing process right now because everybody was dependent on the internet for instant accolades, not only to provide knowledge, but the way the algorithms and everything are working, they don't want to let you promote man's oldest tool.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's gonna weed a bunch of them out, and it just is. But I've seen this happen a dozen times for different reasons. It's like one year the tactical folders will be the hottest thing, and then it's high-end Bowie knives, and then it's chef's knives, and then whatever, it'd be working knives and pocket knives, but it goes in cycles, and it has for years. I mean, it's cyclic. It's like changing seasons. It just does that because the collector interest wanes and comes. And what they don't realize is every bit of these custom knife stuff, that's all expendable income.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And those guys that buy your knives, it makes them feel good.
Yeah.
To buy those knives. There's never been a guy come to a knife show going home bragging about how little he paid for a knife.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is most people don't run at it as a business. They don't mark. I never did. I was too busy playing and enjoying and doing what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have done better. But my friend, like Danny and Karen Winkler, they ran it as a business, and they turned it into a huge business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did.
And I'm happy for him. I love him to death. I've got one of his little knives there I bought for $25 back in '82. It's on the wall right here. And I posted it the other day, and he called me and made me take it down. But anyway, they did it right because they collected the names of everybody that ever sold a knife to. And if they went to a knife show, they sent a personal letter to every one of those makers or buyers within a 200-mile radius of that show, and it would sell out every show.
Yeah.
So it's marketing. You can't sit at the table and get your nose in the phone or in a book or any of that kind of stuff. You need to be engaging your customers.
Mm-hmm. And
you need to be at eye level. You need either a tall chair or you need to stand up, because if you're sitting down and they're looking down at you, they're in a power position.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it doesn't matter how bad your show is, you never ever tell anybody you're having a bad show. I could be dying of starvation behind my table, and people come by and say, "How's your show?" I'm having a great time. And that wasn't a lie, because I was exchanging information and seeing my friends I hadn't seen in a year, and I'm having a ball.
Yeah.
The minute you get that negative energy out, it's going to shut you down.
Absolutely. I couldn't.
Well, and it'll shut them down, because they don't want to buy from somebody nobody's buying from. That's
exactly.
A fact. That's a fact.
That's it. And people with a bad attitude or non-existence. There was several old guys that were known for being just jackasses back in my day, and they would sell knives because people kind of bought into that grumpy. You won't do that today. There's too many other people that are fun to be around. You can buy a knife from.
Right.
I just did a collab with a buddy of mine down here, and it was fun. We had a ball. And Ed Jits.
Okay.
Yeah, we did a collab together. And he said, I'll make the steel and you sell it. And he did, and we had a ball with it. He did an auction. I couldn't do an auction if I had $1,000 bill taped to a knife. But he could sell one. But it was fun. It was fun. I like doing that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
I've done several. I've done some stuff with Neil. I made some folders with Neil. I'm supposed to go back and do another one with him here pretty soon. But
that's awesome.
It's fun stuff. It's if you're weak, my advice to these young guys is take some decent classes from somebody that actually knows what they're doing. That internet is completely full of experts, and some of them actually are.
Yeah.
But not all. You've got to do your research. I know guys who are teaching classes now that can't make a knife themselves.
Right.
Absolutely. And if you want to just go have fun, beat on a piece of steel and put a handle on it any way you can get it on there, that's great. I have no problem with that at all. If you want, it's like the veterans go out. My buddy Greg Coker out there, he does the Blades for Brothers. Laura and I are going to fly out there in October, and she's going to do Skagel handles, and I'm going to do closed eye work.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that closed eye work, I used to do that in the early 90s and probably the late 80s. I figured out how to do it. It's a kind of long story. You want to hear it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, there was an old guy over in Alabama named Cleston Sinyard, and Cleston Sinyard could literally weld stainless steel welding rods and galvanized chain link fence together in a forge.
Nice.
It was unbelievable. He brought me a big old Bowie knife blade up one time and says, and he talked, I mean, he was weighing the sticks. He said, "You see that there yonder? See that little shiny spot in that blade?" I said, "Yeah, Cleston." He said, "That's the end of a 51 Ford push rod." I went, "All right then, thank you." I'll be on my way. But he could weld anything, but he was using cast iron as a flux.
Okay.
And so that what it was doing. See, that cast iron melts at about 1670.
Okay.
And it's ultra high carbon, so it's burning off all the oxygen. So you're working in a oxygen-free atmosphere. That thing looked like a snow cone that was on fire.
Yeah.
And he'd weld it, and he'd weld up the dang stuff. Anyway, I got to thinking I was going to be in my Cleston mode that day. So I went out, I had a chop saw. I'd been cutting off stubs with little pieces of handle material and weld and all that. And there was probably 20 pounds of that mess under that saw. and I got my 2 hands full of it, and I tried to tack it together with a welding rod and then tried to stick it together, and it wasn't going. And I thought, man, how can I do that? So I took a 2 big 2-inch thick blocks of steel, about 4 inches square, and I made what do you call it? A hairpin handle for it out of flat bar.
Okay.
So they were basically a set of dies, and I heated those things up yellow hot, and I took a big ball bearing, a 2-inch ball bearing. I welded a rod on it. I put it in between those 2 dies, and I drove that thing up flat, so it made me a hemispherical die in there.
Yeah, in the center.
Right, and so I was soaking this mess, this cabbage on a stick in the forge, and a borax in it, and I put it in there and I hit it, and it looked like the planet Saturn that had shifted at the equator, awfulest mess you ever saw in your life. I thought, oh man, that ain't working. So I thought, well, it's on a rod. I wonder what happened if I put that thing in a drill and spun it while I was hitting it.
Yeah.
So I brought it back up to welding heat and I spun it in that die and it came out perfectly round. It was perfect ball. And
What?
I thought, man, that thing's going to be completely full of slag and goobers and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was already on the rod, so I just went over to the grind machine and I started grinding on that thing and just grinding it into a perfect sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And when I put acid on it, I literally started weeping. There was pattern wrapped all over the surface of that thing. I've got pictures of it. I can show you.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
It's got stuff all over the outside of it. And I thought, my gosh, if I can do that, that tells me something. And then I decided that I would use that technique on a bunch of other stuff. And then one of the things I did was I had a folder blade that I had almost 100 hours in the steel.
Okay.
And it was
What?
those plaquettes down both sides with a center core, a layered center core. And one of the little plaquettes, when I got ready, I looked at it. I'd already welded it once, and I ground it, and I saw a crack in it. It run up vertically in that panel. And I went, oh man, how am I going to fix that? And anyway, so what I did is I took a piece of steel, and just mild steel and I cut it out just a little bit, tiny bit smaller than that blade. And then I heated up a big flat block of steel, and I drove that flat plate into that steel, which made a depression.
Okay.
And that depression, because of the way the steel forms, it makes what they call a drift, like you put in a die. So if you've got a straight side on it, if you machined out that pocket, it would have a straight side. If you put that steel in there and hit it, what you've got is a very expensive inlay that ain't going to come out. You have to machine it out. But because the taper forms from that flat plate being driven in there, well, it pops right out. And I welded that blade up and I put it in a knife and sold it.
Wow.
It closed that weld.
Yeah.
Well, and I've seen a bunch of, I've seen several people that you've taught different things, and it's more about how to save a project at the stage that you just talked about. And that, basically you're the Damascus recovery specialist is what I've kind of pulled from what I've seen. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, you learn the difference between a German and a master is the size of the script you can fix.
Yeah.
Neil came over and he wanted to make a 1,000,000-layer blade without cutting it, just folding it. And so when you do that, you get a lot of blisters in the steel. And so I showed him how to get the blisters out. And we did that whole blade, and then we took it out on the airboat on the island, and he stood in front of the boat, and when we cut a rope with it, we did a 1,000,000-layer blade in the shop without cutting it. Just kept folding it up on itself.
That's amazing.
You can do anything. You're too stupid to quit.
And that's the moral of the lesson here. I love that. Well, I know you said that you are going out to Neil's soon here to work on another project. Are there any other projects that you're working on, or other classes that are coming up here soon that people can start signing up for?
I'll be in Texas October 5th. Both Laura and I, she's going to teach Skagel style handles, and I'm going to do closed eye, this work I'm just talking about. I'm going to do that out at Greg Coker's place out in Graham, Texas.
Okay,
cool.
And so they've got it. The young man at my age, I can't remember anybody's name in most 30 seconds unless there's pain involved with it. But anyway, they're advertising the heck out of it.
Is that Jeff Davison's?
Yes.
Yes, I saw that. I was so jealous about that. Yes, I know exactly where you're going.
Yeah, I do some pretty intensive folders and stuff. I'll show you that thing. I'll show you a piece of it.
Okay.
Let's see. You can see me there. So I got to turn this around. Look, can you see the blade in that?
Yes, I can.
Sadly, I've lost it on my phone, but Ryan's got it.
I'll be sharing it to you.
later.
Yes.
He can describe it to you.
That's gorgeous.
That's a plug wheel.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah, and then this is going to a friend of mine out in California. It's a one-off custom piece.
Yeah.
And I've been working on the damn thing for a month, but I made that stand and all, and the antlers look like they grew out of the base of it.
Yeah, I love it.
It's just amazing to get to talk to you again. I know it's been a little while, and if life wasn't so busy, I'd be sweeping your shop. You laugh, but I'd be down there just sweeping.
Well, I got a hot tip. One more hot tip for you guys is go in and get you a bucket of that frost out the inside the freezer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you put that bucket in there, and then what you do is you run a little cold water in that, make a slurry, and you put a big fluffy wash rag in there, and you pack both ears with it, so you'll heal up from this conversation.
No, it's a good. I've learned a lot from this, and I appreciate this.
No, thank you for your time. It's awesome to talk to you. I can't wait to see you again at Blade Show, or
Absolutely.
hopefully if you can make it out to are you gonna be at Cole Irons hammering this year? Yes.
Yeah, we're planning. Yeah, absolutely planning on. I couldn't get to Logan's wedding, so yeah, we're
okay. Okay, I'll see you there. Book
right.
it.
You count on it.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you again,
Yes.
Steve, for everything. Appreciate you taking the time and sitting down with us. I will have some content that I will be sending to you, and I'll be in touch here, and we can talk about the cold saw. And then, hopefully here soon next year, I'm going to be doing a little bit more traveling around and meeting with a bunch of knife makers. And I would love to make a swing through your area, just see, you up close and personal, how you do the work here, and then be able to hopefully drop off that cold saw to you.
All right, well, come by. Your room's ready.
All right. I'm waiting. Perfect.
All right, Ryan,
Thank you so much, Steve.
care.
You too, sir.
See you, Steve.
All right.